Do not attempt to... let me start that over. There's nothing wrong with your podcasting set. That doesn't make sense either.
There's nothing wrong with your headset.
There's nothing there's nothing wrong with your headphones or speakers or, whatever you use to listen to podcasts with. Do not attempt to adjust the picture or the tracking. Oh, this metaphor got away from me. I was going to do this whole thing. Never mind. We'll just go into it. Hi, welcome to Genre Grinder. We're going to be talking about found footage horror movies, and the intro was supposed to be a thing about adjusting tracking, but you get the gist of it. With me today, again, is Betsy Jorgensen. Betsy, say hi. Introduce yourself to the people who haven't heard from you already.
Hi, I'm Betsy Jorgensen. I do a podcast called Your Favorite Monsters that up until a couple months ago was only about Scooby-Doo, Mystery Incorporated. But we have recently started doing other cartoons and have started on Clone High.
Right, which is making a comeback, apparently.
Which is bizarre because nothing to do with us, but nothing like starting a old 18-year-old cartoon and then suddenly the kids are doing memes on it.
Yeah.
It makes me feel a little bit like an oracle. So if anybody, has a dead cartoon that they would like revived, we're looking for other cartoons.
Let me think. Actually, no, they just canceled Venture Brothers, so maybe do Venture Brothers. Oh,
man. Venture Brothers would be great.
Maybe it has to be a little bit longer. Oh, they also never got that last season of Metalocalypse either.
I'm not sure I can do Metalocalypse. I liked it a lot, but...
Right. There are monsters.
There are. I mean, admittedly, we're the monsters. That's the whole point.
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, so you ran out of Scooby-Doo is what you're saying.
This series finished. We did all 3 seasons. We set out to do a thing and we finished it. And while it was very nice to complete a project, we felt very good about that. We actually liked continuing doing a podcast and the name was very good.
Yeah, it is. It's a good name.
Instead of starting a new podcast and having to do that rigmarole, we just continued on. That's why the name was flexible.
Yeah, there you go. Just change some of the images on the page.
Yeah, Butlertron is now on the opening slide. That's really what happened.
So we're going to be talking about found footage horror movies, like I said, and that's something that I've never been the best fan of. Not saying I don't like them, but I think it's something that got so saturated for a while there, I didn't really keep up with it. But Betsy has always been a vanguard of the genre, specifically the found footage horror. Right? There's other mockumentaries and found footage, but specifically horror is kind of your thing.
I do love a good found footage horror. I have an amusement with terrible found footage horror. Yeah. Which is the other half of loving found footage horror.
Anything.
You have to at least be amused with the bad ones.
Yeah, and I like Italian.
So many bad ones.
Yeah, I like Italian horror movies, and there are probably maybe an eighth of them are even close to what you consider good. Yeah. So, if you like a genre, you have to appreciate the shit.
And I would say that the Sturgeon's law of a tenth of what is out there is any good. It's more like a 20th in found footage because
a tenth of a tenth.
It's so easy to make a found footage horror movie.
It's something you can do really cheap too.
Yeah. And it is one of those that if you are doing a movie like this, it is a film, a novice filmmaker's dream. Especially if we're thinking of probably the one everybody is familiar with, which is the Blair Witch Project. They made it for almost no money. They did it with some of their friends. And they made millions of dollars. It's everybody's dream.
And a lot of it was in the way they marketed it too, which was new at the time.
Which was brand new and not repeatable, but
no.
However, everybody wants to be able to take that second bite of that golden apple. And that's fine. But it does mean that if people are going to keep trying to bite at that apple, they're going to make a lot of crappy movies.
Yeah. And I think that the ones that are really successful monetarily are the ones that had a good gimmick going into it. So Blair Witch had the website and the way it was being advertised. And then the first Paranormal Activity had this sort of campaign to like write into your theater and demand they have it.
Yeah.
Most of them, I feel like, are made for the direct to streaming kind of
Direct to
setup.
streaming has definitely bumped up their ability to get out there. I think if we did not have as big of an opportunity for filmmakers to have like the internet to put their movie up on and have a fairly loose licensing structure so that you can watch their movie on, say, like Netflix or Amazon Prime for what it's already costing for your membership, there would not be as many out there because distribution deals are still very hard. But now that, you can get it, if, say, you're sick and you just want to watch very terrible movies, you can do that all day, and you can watch a lot of terrible found footage movies.
Yep.
I've done
and
it.
yeah, and I think that, well, I did my best to try to figure out like the first found footage horror movie, which you can't really do it, but there is a 1972 film by Charles B. Pierce called The Legend of Boggy Creek, which is a faux documentary horror movie that has like reenactments. But it also might not count because half of it is a real documentary where they are interviewing people about a Bigfoot-like monster that lives in Arkansas.
Okay.
And so that part of the movie is an actual documentary. And then they have reenactments to be like the scary part of the movie. And so I don't know if that counts. So then the next one, there's a mockumentary called Punishment Park from 1971, the year before, by Peter Watkins, who is a British filmmaker who came to America. And it's more of, it's about political prisoners in a slightly more dystopic version of 1970s America, like just a smidge worse.
Okay.
Who are, they're political prisoners and they get taken to something called Punishment Park. That's a brutal survival game where you can either go to prison for life for being of subversive or homosexual, or I'm trying to remember all the things. Basically, it's just an excuse for racism and homophobia and sexism.
Like America.
Yeah, like America. So that's what I'm saying. It's slightly worse. So they give you the option to do the Punishment Park run, and the thing, and basically police chase you and brutalize you, and you are going to just die in Punishment Park. You can't win. They say if you get to this American flag, you'll be free, but the rules don't apply to them.
Of course they don't. Yeah.
And so it's all one big metaphor, and it's a horrifying movie, but I don't know if it would count as a horror movie. So
That's fair.
So that really brought me up to, in 1979, a director called John Ais Nihil, which is very hard to pronounce, and I have probably butchered it. He made, you could probably guess with a gimmick, it's called Manson Family Movies.
Ah, yes.
So
I think I caught it.
Yeah. So that one's kind of obvious. That came out in 1979. But what I think made people trying to like structure movies like this was Ruggero Deodato's Cannibal Holocaust the year after that.
Yeah.
Which is one half found footage, one half movie about just like a typical Italian cannibal movie. And then they find the footage of the people who had disappeared and been eaten by the cannibals, and discover that they really pushed the cannibals, and that the people making the film were the villains. It's a pretty brutal and inexcusable movie because it's full of real animal violence, and it's pretty fucking racist, but it's also really, really well made.
I mean, it comes up in a lot of lists of classic horror movies because it was both, it's both brutal. It is it is horrifying in a lot of both very real ways and as a movie. and it was very influential to a lot of people because it left an impression.
Yeah, I mean, it's
still terrible.
It's still frightening to watch. The found footage aspect is really what works in that. And then there's another Italian movie that it's absolutely not a found footage movie, Emanuele in America. The Emanuele series is actually it's the Black Emanuele series. It's a ripoff of the French Emanuele films starring a black actress that was made in Italy. But Emanuele in America has a scene where she finds a snuff film, and it's also really convincing. That's by Joe D'Amato. It's also really convincing, real horrifying part in this otherwise standard issue exploitation, kind of gross out late 70s Italian film. But, you can't really count that as a found footage horror movie. And so before Blair Witch really opened it up, you had, there's a movie called Man Bites Dog by Remy Belvaux and Benoit, oh gosh, French words, Poelvoorde, Poelvoorde. Sorry, Benoit, who I think he died. I can't remember. Man Bites Dog. Another it's a black comedy though. It's a horrifying movie. It's very scary in sense of what's happening. It's a film crew following around a serial killer who's explaining how he does his stuff. And the real thrust of the movie is that the film crew starts getting involved in the murders, and that's when it gets really, so that's a morbid, very upsetting movie that I still am not sure is really a horror movie.
I mean, there is the big problem with found footage horror movies as a sub-genre is exactly where it crosses the line between that and mockumentary. Because basically I feel is if the people who are filming it are alive at the end is kind of like where it turns. Like, are they presenting it? Is sometimes kind of where it happens, but at the same time, you can also say if the people who are filming it realized what you're looking at is sometimes more of it. Like if there's stuff in the film that you are seeing that the people who are showing it to you didn't realize. Those are the two, like, what is found footage.
And we're talking about the three movies we picked, mockumentary is going to come up a lot in. It's part of they're definitely there would be you could separate the two for sure, like Blair Witch. Well, no, I guess because Blair Witch is a mockumentary that then in Cannibal Holocaust the crew died and they found their footage. Yeah. Whereas there's something like The Bay, which is a movie I really like, is someone has gathered the footage to create a mockumentary based on an event that they experienced.
Grave Encounters.
Right, which we talked about in the you participated in the best horror movies of the 2010s. Yeah,
yes.
We talked about
which is a movie I will champion until I am blue in the face. Is a found footage mockumentary because somebody has, and most of them are technically, it's a found footage document because of the nature of a movie. Somebody has stitched them together to make a narrative. Yeah. But it's whether that narrative has like a voiceover or if that narrative is trying to tell a greater point. I feel like one of our films tonight is definitely more of a found footage mockumentary rather than a straight on found footage. Just because somebody's trying to tell the story of the victim through the things that were left behind, and they're interviewing people, and those interviews aren't found footage. Actually, like our last two are more mockumentaries. Yeah,
and there are some interesting, because what's weird is that Blair Witch was really popular, but they didn't really figure out how to cash in on it right away. It really took until after Paranormal Activity just exploded that now just everything became that. But there was a couple, there's a couple in between, but what you're talking about, one I like, Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, is a mockumentary that becomes a horror movie because it breaks out of the movie. And then the Wreck movies are like a broadcast that is something terrible happens during the broadcast, which is another interesting way to do it.
Well,
that,
and like, yeah, sorry, go on.
No, well, like that to me, the broadcast idea is something that I think I'm surprised hasn't been used more often. Because I just remember every like traumatic event I can think of in the world since I've been alive. It's all about how we experience watching it on television, on the news, and flipping through channels and stuff. Cloverfield, for instance, if they actually made a Cloverfield sequel, I think I talked about this with Jim on the best film because he liked Cloverfield. But so the Cloverfield sequels aren't really Cloverfield sequels, but if they ever made one, I think it would be interesting to take that approach and have not just the footage of these people who are recording for no real good reason, recording this monster attack, but take their footage and then the footage of all the other people, because obviously something this massive would be getting news coverage and stuff.
Oh yeah, I was actually going to bring up, that's what I was going to be interrupting you to talk about Cloverfield. The fact that if you're recording things as they happen, you get that broadcast kind of feel. It's what happens at the end that, like, really, how it ends kind of gives you the idea of what kind of found footage movie it is. And the idea that you can't tell in the middle what kind of found footage movie you're at is part of the reason I like them a lot. Where, like, there's one that we're not actually going to talk about that I highly recommend people go check out. It's called Evidence.
Okay.
Basically, there's a bunch of police officers, and they're at a crime scene, and they have all this evidence of a serial killer, or a spree killer, I guess, and all of these dead bodies, and there are cameras there, and so they're getting reconstructed footage from these damaged cameras, and as they're doing the forensic organization, like the forensic review of all these cameras and getting evidence, they're piecing together what happened during the day. But as the movie goes on, they're finding new footage that is piecing together more things about what's happening during the day. And like in the footage, they're finding new places to look for evidence. It's very video gamey, but like the actual acting in it is what like elevates it from just seeming like a video game.
Well, and that's, I think, the key. The reason why most found footage horror sucks isn't just because it's easy to do and cheap to do, but because too many filmmakers don't try to find a way to make it interesting on a story level. They just try to recreate jump scares and stuff like that. It's just sort of, they just know something worked, something scared other audiences, so we're just going to redo that with slightly different mythology behind it, and we're not going to. I mean, there's so many ways you can be clever with it that they don't try to do.
It's part of the reason I don't like the paranormal activity movies, because they're cheap.
I find them really dull, personally. Well, okay.
I mean, they're cheap narratively.
Yeah.
They lull you into a sense of boredom. And some people can call that tension if they want. Yeah. But I get sleepy.
Yeah.
And then they do a loud noise. Yeah. And you're supposed to jump. And
which
that gives
once.
some people and that gives some people like a huge endorphin rush, and the adrenaline feels like you're excited. But I just get mad.
Yeah. And
I don't watch movies to get mad.
Yeah, you'd watch real documentaries if you wanted to get mad.
I just look at the news.
Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Every time that's something. We'll go into that later. I think I'm going to bring that up towards the end. We're going to go into our first movie then, which is Trollhunter.
Nå skal vi da opp til en gård her oppe, hvor det har vært noe på lokalnyhetene om hendelser.
Folk vil jo alltid prøve å finne naturlige forklaringer på sånne ting. Men hvis man oppsøker åsted og leter etter spor, er det ikke vanskelig å finne ut om det er troll som har vært på ferde.
Hvorfor skal ikke folk få vite hva som foregår her?
Skru av det kameraet. Nå. Tror du Michael Moore ga seg etter første forsøk? Tror du det?
Det er ingen her som tror på Gud eller Jesus.
Nei, det er ingen som...
Fordi det lukter kristmannsblod. Det tar jo sikkert litt tid da, før han kommer med det trollet. Kanskje han filmer oss. Det sitter jo sikkert og ler av oss et sted.
Hovedgrupper er bergtroll og skogsrov.
Se her, Thomas.
Æsj. Raglepant, tusselabb, limtusse. Troll!
From 2010, it's a Norwegian film by André Øvredal, or Øvredal. So sorry, André. André. But yeah, so I don't know any Slavic, or not Slavic. See, I'm not even in the right area of the world. I called it a Slavic language.
Nordic
language. Probably the only thing I'm worse at than Nordic language pronunciation is Slavic language pronunciation. Anyway,
the white people
Trollhunter
are coming for you.
Yeah. You know, if more people listen to this podcast, I'd probably get very angry emails. Anyway, Trollhunter. This is a very adorable movie. It's almost breaking the rules immediately because it's a satire of found footage horror. It's a comedy. It's a horror movie depending on who you are, but it's a comedy.
Yeah, there's a lot of funny parts, yes.
It's very funny. And so what it's sort of like, it's a little bit like a satire of those TV series like the Ghost Hunters or Finding Bigfoot, which I don't think was really a big deal when this movie was being written in 2009.
Oh, it totally wasn't. I would actually disagree with you about how much of a satire it is of Ghost Hunters and the like. But
yeah, I guess I've applied.
It feels like it.
Because since then, we've got movies that try to do this, or TV shows that try to do this seriously.
I would think it's more of a satire of big game hunters.
It has sort of like, the basic idea is that these are like college students, or like film students,
Yeah.
I believe, are trying to make a documentary about some sort of weird happenings out in the wilderness. Where they kind of at the beginning of the movie, it's not clear that they're actually following around this man who later claims to be a troll hunter. Mm-hmm. I think they're just attracted to him because he's strange, and they want to know exactly what's going on with him. And
what it seems to be is at the beginning of the movie, they know that there's a weird animal hunt thing going on, and it's like a big hunting deal is happening. And as film students, they're like, this'll be a great film idea.
Right.
And there is satire about that.
Right. They're less like, it's not, you could do this satirizing it. They could be like Werner Herzog types, which there is a movie called Incident at Loch Ness that literally stars Werner Herzog as himself. That's
delightful.
But so that's like the two routes you can go with funny. You can go with the dead serious Werner Herzog type, or you can do college students. I think those are both very funny options.
Yes.
Yeah, but it's so they find this very neurotic, strange, quiet man who is a part of this, and sort of decide to make the documentary about him because he
after
is
like talking to people, they're like, well, there's this one dude who doesn't talk to anybody, and he smells weird,
yeah,
and he doesn't talk to anybody, but he goes out all night and sleeps all day.
Yeah,
isn't that weird?
And they also figure out that something's fishy because they keep saying, oh, it was a giant bear that killed those German tourists. And it's fishy that it's always a giant bear. And so the big thrust of the movie isn't really just finding trolls with this guy, but it's the idea that this guy's so sick of his mundane, hard to do government job that he's just sort of unloading all of his secret knowledge upon these guys. I think a good way to put it is it's like if there's an episode of X-Files where Fox and Mulder find Fox and Mulder, geez.
Fox Mulder, I love it.
Fox Mulder and Gillian Anderson, Dana Scully. Scully and Mulder stumble across a really like a big time conspiracy theory, and the person who they ask about it, instead of covering it up, just says, "Yeah, let me just tell you about it." And
Let me actually just bring you to the office. I'll
And it's all-
introduce you to everybody.
and it's all
And because I'm
paperwork.
there, they'll be chill with it.
Yeah. And it's all paperwork, and there's like the government guy threatens to destroy their footage, but nobody really takes them seriously. It's just like, yeah, it's almost like I guess it's like a workplace satire in a way too. It's like what if it was The Office, but instead of working at an office, they worked out in the parks department.
I mean, there absolutely is a lot of that. And, like, there's a lot of, like, crazy workplace comedy aspects of it. Because, like, they talk about how gross it is to do troll stuff.
Yeah.
And that they have to monitor the trolls, and that everything about it is gross, and they drool, and all of these things.
Yeah, they drool, they piss on everything, they shit everywhere. You have to
Yeah.
like cover yourself with their musk so they won't notice you.
They can smell Christians.
Yeah, they can smell. Well, that's I think so. So the two keys to this movie is, one, just a funny idea that there's this guy who just hates his job that should be an exciting, intense job in any other movie.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the other funny part or good part is that they go super old school on all the trolls. They're really folktale trolls. They're not like, they haven't redesigned them to look like scary versions of existing animals, or like xenomorphs, H.R. Giger things. They're based on folk tales that most of us know. Like there's one who lives under a bridge and they coax it out with a billy goat.
Their folklore is just mwah, so good.
And I looked up, and they're based a lot of the things on illustrations by Theodore Kitzlin and John Bayer, who do these sort of cartoonish. They're images you've probably seen before, listener. The best way I would say is that think like Fraggles and Gorgs and Doozers are kind of like the fuzzy versions of these illustrations. They look like Muppets basically, but with just more detail on them to make them look realistic.
Yeah.
Or troll dolls. They look a little like troll dolls sometimes, which I think is also a Norwegian thing or a Swedish thing maybe. And so
Originally, yeah. I think it was Nordic.
so there's this sort of cuteness to these dangerous creatures, because like the people are really frightened of them, and they can smell the blood of a Christian. And so they have a guy who lies and says doesn't believe in God. And he finally, when the trolls are finding them, he finally reveals that he's a Christian and believes in God. And they're very angry. Not that he's a Christian and believes in God, but that he didn't tell them so that they wouldn't bring him along.
Yeah, and that is actually part of the like horror-y part of that, because like they can smell that and it drives them crazy and they want to destroy that.
Right. And their actions are super violent.
Yes.
But they're so silly looking, and that there's just like this great tension between being scared for the people, but also just laughing at these things with their giant noses.
Yeah.
The way there's a scene where the Trollhunter he puts himself in basically one of these bear-proof suits that crazy man. There's a documentary about a man making a bear-proof suit. He has this sort of armor that he's made, and the troll just slaps him down, and he just is knocked unconscious immediately. And it's so Looney Tunes in the way it's executed, which I suppose is a good thing too, because the CG is actually really successful, in part because it's sort of cartoonish.
Yeah. I mean, I was just watching Sleepy Hollow the other day, and Sleepy Hollow for its time was really successful in using what little CG it had, because it married a lot of it to practical effects. And I feel like this movie does the same thing.
Yeah.
It marries all of its CG to practical effects, and so it's very good.
And it does itself a favor by saying that trolls only come out at night, and he has a UV strobe that he uses to turn them to stone. So lots of flashing, you can save a lot of money on frames that way, I suppose, when you're doing your CG later.
And if it doesn't look very good, people aren't going to notice.
Yeah, because it's like every found footage thing. It's jittery.
Yeah.
I suppose that's another reason why there's so many found footage movies is because it's really easy to put special effects in them. You could probably do most of it with just a desktop.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's, you do yourself a lot of favors.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it crosses over from just straight up satire and humorous to horror, partially because of how it ends.
Yes, it does end on a dark note. It sort of has like a big heroic ending.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I do want people to watch this, so I'm actually not going to spoil my favorite joke in the whole thing, which is the reveal as to what's wrong with the trolls.
Yeah, that's
I won't, because that was the biggest laugh the first time I saw this. But yeah, it does end pretty dark, and it is truly found footage in that regard, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
And that's what I think it does so well, is that it's funny and kind of scary at the same time, which is really hard to do. Usually you're kind of one or the other, or you're alternating. And I feel like this one kind of keeps up the tension.
And it tells you at the beginning that this footage was found.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That it wasn't presented. It was found after the disappearance of these students. And it's presented, this is what was found. If anybody has information on these students, please tell your local authorities. But nobody has it. And at the end, they explain some more. They ask some people who are in the footage for comments, whatever. I think that is a hallmark of a very good found footage movie, especially one that mixes humor in it, where it gets you to forget that the people who you are watching are probably dead.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's the whole thing about a found footage movie, is it's solving a mystery. It's solving a mystery about why these people aren't here.
Mm-hmm.
You are usually watching something post-mortem.
Which really goes back to Cannibal Holocaust. It's about what happened to these people, and the twist being they basically brought it upon themselves.
Yeah.
It's always been, I respect the Blair Witch Project, but I've never really liked it as much as a lot of other ones because it very purposely doesn't offer any answers to really exactly what's happening. And that's, I think, its appeal is its ambiguity, and it's sort of like unknowable horror that happens in that.
Yeah.
And I don't think Blair Witch would be better if you explained that there was literally a witch out there killing people or something like that or whatever. Often that's where movies like one Last Exorcism is, I think, a fantastic movie up until the end when it has to become a horror movie, like hard horror movie, and just have like big reveals and stuff. I think that a lot of them get to the end and just don't know where to end. Whereas Trollhunter has like a logical end point that doesn't feel abrupt. It feels like the end of the movie, but it still leaves us with questions. And I think it's hard to do that right.
I feel that Blair Witch falls down as a horror movie by putting all of its mythology someplace other than the movie.
Yes. Yeah, that's what Ridley Scott does these days with all his alien movies. Like Alien Covenant had some of the coolest scenes only available on the Blu-ray or in the advertising.
So if you only watch the Blair Witch Project, which is all you should have to do to understand a movie,
mm-hmm.
You should only have to watch the movie to get the movie, and I will stand by that. The end scene where they're in a house with a bunch of little handprints, and they go down to the basement and somebody's like looking in a corner, doesn't really make sense about what's happening, and you don't get why it's scary.
Mm-hmm. Wasn't there a movie, I don't remember what it was called, but that literally ended with go to this website to see how the movie ends?
Maybe. Was it fear.com.com?
No. It was newer than that. It was a exorcism movie.
Oh, I don't know. I stopped watching exorcism movies.
The Devil Inside. That's what it was called. The Devil Inside ended with, I didn't see it, but apparently it ended with a sort of go to this website kind of thing. And it was just everybody hated it a lot. I don't know why they thought that was a good idea.
Okay, that isn't true. I still watch exorcism movies, but I tend to only watch them on streaming services.
Yeah.
I don't watch exorcism movies in theaters. I have to yell at the screen too much.
I do really like the movie The Last Exorcism. That was one I was considering covering.
I love it.
But again, this ties into Trollhunter. That one, instead of the mystery route, that one's about the character route, and that it is like the Trollhunter in the titular Trollhunter. It's about an exorcist who is going to reveal that this is all fraud.
Yeah.
And so it's someone who's letting us behind the curtain, which would be an actual reason to have a documentary.
Yeah, listeners, we actually discussed about doing The Last Exorcism, and I think I won. It was a close call between that and our third movie.
Yeah.
And I think the third movie is more of a classic kind of found footage.
Right.
And Trollhunter is
I think Trollhunter and Last Exorcism actually have quite a bit in common in that regard. And the thing that Trollhunter does so well structurally isn't the mystery, because the mystery isn't really the point. As soon as we know there are trolls, there are trolls. But the structure is about building the characters from skeptics to believers to participants, which is highlighted when they get a new camera woman and they're annoyed that she doesn't believe in trolls, which just earlier in the movie they didn't believe in trolls, but now they're part of it, and now they're just well, how can you not believe in trolls kind of thing.
Everybody should watch Last Trollhunter. It does have subtitles you're going to have to read unless you speak Norwegian.
I should say the Polish characters that show up are apparently based on a hurtful xenophobic stereotype. I don't know enough about Norwegian culture, but apparently there's a stereotype about Poles come to Norway to do the shittiest jobs, and that they're sloppy people. It's basically the same stereotypes in America we have about these days about Latin Americans and that they used to have about Asians.
Cool.
Yeah, it's apparently one of those. However, there is an anti-xenophobic gag where the government people keep trying to blame the strange behavior on Russian bears. It's well, do bears do that? Oh yeah, Russian bears do that. I thought that's a very funny play on government blaming other cultures for the problems that they've created themselves.
Oh dear.
But yeah, if there are any listeners who are Polish or Norwegian and sensitive to this, I don't actually know. I just found this out. I knew the characters were supposed to be Polish and that they were supposed to be kind of sloppy, but I didn't know that was a hurtful stereotype. So I guess keep that in mind while watching it. But otherwise,
you find out when you start watching movies in other cultures how they mess up too.
Trollhunter is one of my favorites, and I was going to cover it in the best movies of the 2010s, best horror movies of the 2010s, but there was just so many movies to talk about, so I was glad I was able to talk about it here.
Yeah.
So we'll move on to the second movie we picked, which was, I guess, originally released in 2008, but didn't make it here until 2010, which is Lake Mungo.
The following is based on true events.
Can you interpret dreams?
Sometimes. How do you feel when you wake up from these dreams?
They scare me a bit.
For Alice Palmer, underneath the hopes of a bright future were suspicions
I feel like something bad is going to happen to me.
that death was near.
You scared of dying?
Yeah, of course I'm scared of dying.
That was the last time that I saw her. I kept hearing noises in the hallway.
It hasn't reached me yet, but it's on its way. I feel like I can't do anything.
I think Ellie saw a ghost. I didn't have any rational explanation for who was in those photos.
Something was happening inside that house, and I wanted to find out what it was.
There was a ghost in our house.
Lake Mungo.
Yeah, of course I'm scared of dying. Isn't everyone scared of dying?
And this is by Joel Anderson, written and directed by. I should say the other one was also written and directed by. These are all three of these are movies that are writer-director movies, which I don't know if that is a sign of this being a genre that requires auteurism, or if, you know, there's not much of a script usually when you start these kinds of movies, and you. But Lake Mungo has.
I think you have to have a good vision.
Yeah, Lake Mungo has a vision. The idea here, that the short way to describe Lake Mungo is that it sort of begins like a kind of corny A&E true crime or investigation discovery true crime, because we didn't really have the Netflix, Amazon, HBO.
It's basically an unsolved mystery.
Yeah, it's like an Unsolved Mysteries episode, so it feels a little corny. But as it goes on, it actually becomes moving in a way that I can't say in any other found footage horror movie. They can be scary, they can be disturbing, they can be funny, but very few of them are moving.
Yeah. I do want to put a huge content warning for sexual assault, I think.
Yeah, at least, it's at least statutory.
Yeah.
It's something that the movie doesn't dip into as much as I've actually liked them to be a little more specific about it. I think that it's sort of
like, it is supposed to be a twist and a shock. Mm-hmm. And it is, but they don't show things, but there is
there's a blurry sex scene that is that is on this end of disturbing and
of a young girl having relations with adults.
Yeah. And it's actually, the idea behind this movie is a woman has drowned, a young woman has drowned, and her family is trying to, they basically have decided they're haunted. And as the movie goes on, it's that kind of classic, my favorite type of ghost story, I should say, where the ghost is basically trying to lead people, instead of being malevolent, trying to lead people in the right direction to solve their murder or whatever.
Yeah.
Though in this case, I think that's one of the shortcomings, is that we don't really get to that point. The movie kind of ends before that, which I think was Joel Anderson's purpose, was to kind of end it in a way that was telling us that we aren't going to get the answers, which sometimes is pretty powerful, but I do kind of wish that we would have had some more answers.
Yeah. And it's almost, I feel like it's almost saying that it doesn't matter what the answers were, her family could move on, which is itself something.
Right. Yeah, it's more of a it's a movie about people, family moving on from a dead loved one, and the way that it almost tears their family apart with kind of accusations. The brother / son admits to faking some footage of her as a ghost.
Yeah. So I feel like just a brief rundown. Like it's a unknown unsolved mystery thing, and they interview the family, and there's like a psychologist who does like regression memory, who talks to the mom to like interpret her dreams. And so we're going through the documentary, and the son does some footage, like some photography and some filming, and the dead girl shows up in some of it.
Her name's Alice,
Alice, yes. Alice shows up, quote unquote. And then later it's found out that he faked that, and part of the reason it comes out is they find real footage of her having sexual relations with the neighbors.
Yes, in his found footage, they realize that the one part's faked, but then there's another part that they see it and they realize it's their neighbor, and he's been going in their house looking for something.
Yeah. And at that point, he's like, I didn't do that.
Yeah. They don't. So they don't interview
and the neighbor has moved away.
Yeah.
So the family gets no closure about that. But they moved away, I think, before Alice died. I don't know the timeline on that. I can't remember.
The timeline's a little, I think they moved away after she died, but not long. And what it does really well is recreate that sort of, the feeling of those, which is becoming more common now with streaming services and prestige documentaries, like docu-series, I should say. That's like the new thing. So it's kind of interesting that this movie was written in 2005 before that was ever anything, and released in 2008, still before that was ever really a thing. Like every once in a while, HBO would have like a special event docu-series, but documentaries were still usually sort of separated by like theatrical releases and shit you saw on cable TV when you were homesick from school. And this is definitely sort of recreating the homesick from school type stuff you watch.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of like forensic files type stuff in there with footage of the cops digging out the body and some of that. But yeah, I mean, they don't go into like DNA testing or anything, but it's got some of that sort of like, you think the mystery.
Oh, yeah.
I was going to say, you think that's going to be the mystery, but that's not really what it's about.
No. What it really reminds me of, and this is kind of weird, but it reminds me a lot of Twin Peaks.
No, I actually have a note here saying, and I was afraid that it was because I just watched all of Twin Peaks in a like month-long period that I had that on the brain, but it's definitely, yes.
No, the Who Killed Laura Palmer thing is definitely, I think, forefront on a lot of minds.
Well, and the whole thing in Twin Peaks is that you find out that Laura Palmer isn't the little angel everybody thought she was, and she has secrets and
and the whole having sex with older people and maybe coerced into it, and that her death means something and there might be something supernaturally involved. I can definitely see this being influenced by Twin Peaks.
For sure. Her friends in their interviews being hurt that she had kept things from them.
Yeah. So her class goes to a trip to Lake Mungo, and she freaks out because she saw something, and they never really say what it is, and she breaks her phone and buries it. I think they go find it later.
Yeah, her parents go to Lake Mungo. That's sort of the beginning of the end of the movie. Is the parents?
It's like the beginning of the third act.
Yeah,
is like how things start coming together. Is that when we find out that she's also been seeing that therapist?
Yeah, which is something that real docuseries do now, which is they give you a whole bunch of information, and then there'll be episode 2, they'll give you information that you realize contradicted earlier interviews. So the doctor had known all this information, but because he was a psychiatrist and she had not wanted him to share it, he didn't share the information.
Yeah.
Which is something that happens in the real world. And it's like a theme. It's like something that real documentaries get accused of sort of editing into their movies to create more controversy. But so this movie recreates that beautifully, I think.
Yeah.
Again, before it was a cliche. I don't think it was a cliche yet. I think that maybe you have Errol Morris movies and maybe a couple Herzog movies, but really like The Thin Blue Line that have that sort of mystery aspect, like a true crime mystery. Like every time we discover a new step, maybe it contradicts something earlier, and this guy lied about this thing. But now that's like bog standard. The way you make docuseries, you make a 6-episode thing, and the best one I don't remember what it's called. The HBO I Love You Now Die, I think it was called. And it was about the girl who had supposedly texted at her boyfriend to kill himself, and he did kill himself. And that did a beautiful job. It was 2 parts, and the first part was the point of view of people who believed that she had made him kill himself, and the second part was from the point of view of her being a troubled girl and he was abusive towards her anyway. And it was a really like cheap and kind of mean way to pull the rug out from under you after the first episode. But when it's done right, it's done really well.
Yeah.
And you like having the rug pulled out from under you like that. You like having your assumptions challenged. And I think Lake Mungo does that well in its like middle act by revealing all this stuff.
I think the thing it does best, though, is it gives you. I really want people to watch this, so I'm not gonna like. I've given up to the beginning of the third act, and I think I'm gonna stop about kind of how it ends. But I feel like they give you a bunch of information, and then they re-show you a bunch of evidence at the end, and highlight things you might have missed.
Yeah, which is also really satisfying to rewatch.
And also one of the scariest things about the movie. Like, I don't think the movie is scary.
No,
but, and looking at things and realizing that something else was there the whole time is great. Is just wonderful. It's very good.
And I think that what you're saying, the whole movie, it's not that scary of a movie. It sort of starts, part of its appeal, I think, is that the first half, or a little bit less than half, is not very scary. It's trying to make these ghosts scary, but then it tells us those weren't real ghosts. The kid was faking it. Yeah. And then the real ghosts come up. But the fact that it's so mundane at the beginning is, I think, part of its appeal. And I think it's a double-edged sword, because here in America, and I'm imagining in a lot of countries, it was bought by Lionsgate and After Dark as part of the After Dark Horror Fest 8 Films to Die For.
And one of the first ones. Yeah,
it was a thing that I think most people have already forgotten. That ran in 2006, 2007, 2008, 2010, and it took a break and did only video, and then it did it again in 2015.
Oh, I thought it was one of the earlier ones. So it's one of the later ones.
This was the 2010 one. This was the third or fourth one.
Okay.
And these were something that, so the double-edged sword in the standpoint that Lionsgate and After Dark really pushed these things out. And so Lake Mungo got a small theatrical release because they toured these, and then got a major DVD release. I remember I reviewed most of these, and they were sending them out without even you asking. They just were sending the whole After Dark Horror Fest.
Yeah.
8 Films to Die For. And you could find them, they were on every streaming service when those first started. They're still on most streaming services. It really got a huge push. Unfortunately, the rest of the After Dark Horror Fest movies are what you expect from medium to low budget movies that wouldn't have otherwise gotten a theatrical rollout. They're mostly bad.
One in the entire thing that was worth it.
There's a couple that like if you're watching all 8 in a row, as I often did when I reviewed them, you start to appreciate minor good things about some of them. You're like, well, this one isn't as bad as the last one. So mediocrity ends up being good enough usually. But this was definitely the best of them. And
I remember the first one, like the first 8 Films to Die For, not being as bad, but I also watched a bunch of them with you.
Yeah, I think it was the 2007 ones that there was 3 or 4 that were decent horror movies that still felt like straight to video, but were good straight to video. I can't really remember any of the titles of the good ones off the top of my head, except for like Mungo. There was one called Borderlands that I thought was an interesting sort of.
Oh, I remember that one.
It was like it was definitely something that either was trying to cash in on Hostel or just happened to tap into the same ideas that Hostel did. And that tourists. There was also a movie called Touristas. There was sort of like this whole series of movies that are all kind of cropped up at the same time, and were all accused of ripping off Hostel, but probably actually didn't rip off Hostel. They just came up with the ideas because it was post 9/11 and everybody was super xenophobic. But there's Borderlands was a pretty decent one. It was a sort of a chainsaw massacre meets Hostel in Mexico kind of thing. But Lake Mungo is like the one good one, and so because it was released as part of After Dark Horror Fest, I think that it. Even myself was a little underwhelmed because it's not very scary or gory or like it's not what you expect from these type of movies. So being coupled with them was a problem, but it's just always been around. And I think it finally sort of found its audience over the years. And I think it really has a very good reputation at this point.
Yeah.
I remember
disappeared from streaming services for a long time.
Yeah. But yes, Lake Mungo is better than it's almost this ideal version of what you want out of this type of mixed media found footage horror, I guess is what you call it. Like, and also watching it in HD, because I watched it on Amazon streaming. I'd only ever watched it on DVD. The HD actually makes a difference because there's a huge difference in the, like, there's the film quality, the actual film stock that they're doing the interviews on, and then there's the footage they've recorded like off television, and then there's like footage that the cops recorded with their stuff, and the difference in the footage really adds, for lack of a better word, texture to the whole thing, I think.
Yeah.
And the performances are really good. And I read that I guess the director didn't have an official script with dialogue, but he is the interviewer. So he was sort of leading the actors with interview questions. And so it feels really naturalistic because the actors are actually thinking up responses.
Okay.
Which is a really good way to do it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a good enough actor, I feel like if people... I feel that's a way that you get terrible found footage
Right,
movies.
because you have terrible actors.
Well, it's not even terrible actors. Like, you have to have a good enough director to, like, have good questions. Because asking somebody to inhabit that kind of character, to, like, actually know the answers to questions like that, is a lot. And to actually have fleshed out that character enough after you've written it, so that you can tell the actors, what those kind of answers are, is very big. Because, like, when I'm writing, I give my characters a lot of backstory, but that isn't common. Usually you're like, I know what the character's doing in this scene and I know these answers, but, like, I don't know how they feel about the neighbor unless that comes up. And the ability for an actor to be good at improv to that extent is not necessarily common or needed. So
I'm not sure, because there's really not a lot of information about the making of the movie. My assumption would be that the script was mostly made up of backstory. And
I would think so.
And
that's how they did the dialogue.
Yeah. And so I'm just going to assume that, the script that they were handed was backstory. And then on the day he would say, I'm going to ask you about this, this, and this. And then maybe throw them a couple curveballs. I'm trying to remember, was Blair Witch, didn't they just leave them messages like that they had to find and then decide how they were going to act around them? So they ended up with like days and days of unusable footage of the poor cast members. That was another funny thing about Blair Witch. I remember people being so excited about that movie that they hoped that the DVD, which was still pretty new at the time, would have all the deleted scenes. And that sounds horrible.
Oh my God. Could you imagine?
The 7-hour cut of the Blair Witch Project.
Sorry, the Snyder cut of Blair Witch.
It's like, now with 8 more hours of people arguing about which direction north is.
Now with every time they called them the wrong name, but they just called them their
used
real
their
name.
names. Yeah, they used their real names. Well, that actually also reminds me, all three of the movies we're going to talk about here are smartly short. They do not overstay their welcomes. And it's amazing how, I would say on average, I bet that on average, found footage horror movies are like 80 minutes or less. They're not even 90 minutes or less. And it's amazing how many of them feel way longer than that.
Yes.
Because they like had like 2 scares in mind and then realized they got to fill another 70 minutes.
I mean, I love found footage horror movies. They're like ghost stories. If they're too long, they start to contradict themselves, and they're not scary anymore.
Right.
I mean, that's the core of why I like found footage horror movies. They are modern ghost stories. They are the things you tell around a campfire. And then they got lost in the woods, and nobody could find them. And you can still hear them screaming now. It's delightful.
Yeah.
But if the person who's telling them goes on too long, you have time to pick it apart. It's all about the storyteller, and it's all about the medium. And you'll hear a ton of bad ones.
Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. It actually reminds me of something. But the last thought I had on this one was, again, it's a portrait of loss and how families deal with loss and how it can almost destroy them.
Yeah.
But watching it in our current political system, I kept on thinking about the scenes where the mom doesn't want to believe that the son has faked these things, and how you could do a version of this story where it's really about how conspiracy theories break apart families.
Yeah.
And like cult beliefs and conspiracy theories, and that the idea that if the mother just would refuse to believe that the son had faked this stuff, would be a different kind of horror movie where no one could convince her otherwise or something like that. That was just something that was running through my head because it had been, I think, 10 years since I saw this. I think the last time I saw it was when it was first released. So I actually couldn't remember how it ended. So I was like, part of me was like, did the mother kill her? That's not what happened. I'll spoil that right now. The mother didn't kill her.
But I could definitely, I feel like that's happened. And like you say that and I'm like, I feel like there's definitely a horror movie out there where somebody faked a haunting and then somebody believed that it was happening and then ends up killing the person who was faking the haunting because they believed the ghost was real.
It's a good enough idea that based on the ratio of how many of these movies exist, it had to be done at some point.
Yeah. It sounds very familiar, but
if not, I guess you can start working on that.
Yeah, I'll write that down. It's okay. I was recording another podcast last night, and we were talking about a different idea for a short story about the Oracle Awards, where hindsight is 20/20, and the idea of, well, of course, whoever wins the Oracle Award would be who can predict who won the Oracle Award.
Yeah, I mean, I come up with the great. My dream in life is to be a mover shaker producer who comes up with the ideas and then doesn't have to do anything else, because I'm always like, oh, that'd make a great movie. I don't want to write that though. That sounds like too much work.
Yeah.
That's my lot in life. Someone should make a movie about that, not me.
No.
Free ideas all around. So, unless you had something else to say about like Mungo, I was going to move on to the third movie.
Yeah, let's do the third.
Okay, so the third movie is House LLC from 2015.
What happened that night at the Abaddon Hotel? What is that?
It's everything.
Sarah, have you watched those?
No.
So you have no idea what's on them?
How beautiful is this?
Hell House.
Look, there it is, there it is. There we go.
What was that?
I don't know.
You have heard the rumors about this.
There are no rumors about this place. No rumors. We talked about this.
It's supposed to be haunted.
All right, dude, lock me in. Hold it.
Godspeed.
Hey, man. How many freaks did we have?
3 freaks. What's going on?
Are you sure?
5. Let me out! Let me out!
It was when we started sleeping there that things started to change.
Mac, you heard that, right? I'm telling you, we have to call it off right now.
We have no business being here. Alex is more confident than ever.
I think we're next.
Go back up! Go back up!
Written and directed by Stephen Cognetti.
Yes.
This is I wrote my message here is this is the platonic ideal of a horror mockumentary.
Yes.
That this could so the basic idea is that quote found footage was uploaded onto YouTube where it was found, you see. And someone made a documentary around that and the 911 recordings and the newscasts. And then it comes out there was all this other footage that actually is the actual background. So it's like a 3-layer cake of found footage mockumentaryism that actually, I think it goes too far doing it doesn't end what it should end, but we'll get into that in a minute here. But it's sort of like, whereas Lake Mungo is the gist of a phenomenon of made for TV sort of true crime stuff, this is a version of the sort of dime a dozen creepypasta videos you find on YouTube, where sometimes they're actually really great, but usually they suck, and where they're like, then this eerie thing happened, and we only have this footage, and sometimes they've made up the footage, but sometimes it's real footage. It really feels like that's the impetus of this movie, and then it goes on from there.
Yes, Gabe messaged me. I was like, oh, we should do House LLC. And Gabe's like, I haven't seen that one. I was like, oh, you need to watch it. And then he messaged me and he was like, I thought I was going to hate this because I hate the characters.
Yeah, I was actually scared this was going to be one of those times when I actually really hated the movie and had to sort of be polite about it. Because
I don't lead you wrong.
These are really dumb characters.
Oh, they're detestable. But it's part of the reason why it works. I say it suffers from too many bros. Yes.
There's
there's so many bros in this movie.
It's basically, there's 4 trust fund white boys with the same haircut and one woman who's the voice of reason, but also like a constant bummer who absolutely hates the entire experience. So she's also unlikable despite being us identifying with her because she's everybody else is a borderline rapist, basically.
Yeah.
So our audience insert also sucks, but the idea is that these guys sort of travel around and make haunted house attractions on the cheap. They will take, in this case, they're taking the Hell House hotel,
which is called the Abanon, which is so dumb. Oh, it's the name of the angel of death.
Oh, I didn't catch that. I don't know.
Oh, it's look, if you got dumb trivia about things that are super goth, like you come to Betsy.
You come to Betsy, Annie. Yeah, I don't know my trivia of angel names and stuff like that. I'm not very good about that.
But it's also like the pun on abandon ye all hope, ye who enter here. Like look.
And is that supposed to be the hotel's name before the untold scary events happen?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Like, it's so dumb.
There are untold scary events, and everybody in the town hates it, and they get word of it, and so they're going to set up a haunted house. And there's something that the movie does very well is that it does the Shining thing, where you're never quite sure of the geography of this hotel.
Yeah.
It's kind of a TARDIS effect, where it looks smaller on the outside, but it has like more going on, and so you do get lost in it with the characters.
Yeah.
Which works very well, I think. And
yes,
the characters being always at each other's throat and always annoying is, for, I don't know, about 45 minutes, I was very upset with it, but I realized that, intentionally or not, it made me so on edge that when scary stuff started to happen, I was actually scared. Because I was already irritable, I think. And I kind of wish I was rooting for somebody, because I think that makes the better movies, is when, like, the best slasher movies are the ones where there's at least one character that you really want to escape. But there's plenty of good slasher movies where you're like, yeah, get them, you know?
I will say, they do hire a couple people.
Yeah.
And I was rooting for those people.
Yeah, like they're actors.
Yeah. Once they hired some people, I started to root for them, and that's actually when it got scary, because I knew none of those people survived.
Yeah, and they do a really good job with the interview subjects. So there's like a professor who like knows about the history of the park, and I'm trying to remember who all did they interview they're interviewing people who know the backstory and the way the information's being, like, we know something terrible happened and people died, but we don't know what it was. And they sort of start planting seeds that the sort of guy in charge might have gone crazy in some way instead of it being supernatural. I think that was really well done.
Yeah. And one thing that is a thread through the whole movie is the crew that's doing the documentary, that's the like bookend piece, has come to the town to see what else like they can find out. And the girl, the audience insert to like all this found footage, who was the only survivor, shows up.
And she has all these tapes that they've
tapes. And she's like, all the answers are in here. And she's real spacey and out of it. And this is like end of Act 1? Beginning of end of Act 2?
Yeah, I think she shows up at the end of Act 1. Yeah. They start showing her footage.
And she's like, I'm just going to sit down outside while you look at this. And you're like, what? Okay. And you know something's wrong. And you know this is a trap of some kind. But...
yeah, you're not going to win an award for figuring out how the movie ends. but it's still... Yeah. It's kind of its appeal.
So and then you start getting the more footage of like inside and not just like the YouTube stuff and the other professors and the things talking about it. But
they're sort of home movies, I guess. Is
yeah. And that's where you start getting. Yeah, it has to be. It might even be earlier than the end of Act 1 because that's how you get the home movies, and that's how you get like wingman guy talking about sleeping with everybody, and lead guy only wanting to make money and can't do it in New York City, and tech guy really just not paying attention to any of his friends because they're all terrible.
And structurally, it's pretty smart. Again, I think it falls apart at the very, very end, but by having it be a documentary within a documentary, a document within a documentary, they can keep coming out of the found footage to give us more context and more lore, which opens up more questions.
Yes.
So again, this movie, like the other two we talked about, succeeds because its structure is thoughtful. It's not just, we're going to stick these... A bad version of this would only be the found footage part, which would just be people annoying each other, weird things happening, and then people dying.
Yeah. Because all they had was to like go back to the house and somebody reads a book about it.
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't get that break in tension that like resets your internal levels. But if you can go out to that professor, like, and a picture of the room and him telling you that the original owner of the hotel hung himself in that room, that allows you to like look at that room in a new light and understand why it was super creepy, that something fell off the chandelier.
Right.
And you recontextualize that scene and it's scary.
Yeah. And so it also tells us that the worst is going to come at the climax.
Oh, yes.
And so we see a glimpse of it in the sort of YouTube footage, which is really well done in the way that like when you see real like crime footage, like something like you see something on the news, or you're a gross 19-year-old who goes to video stores and rents those sort of like Faces of Death, but Faces of Death was fake, but like the real Faces of Death and that shit. The sort of feeling that stuff gives you that like you're not supposed to be seeing this. I think that YouTube clip has that sort of shit. I shouldn't be watching this. This is something bad. So we're primed for something very bad to happen, and they're building to the very bad thing. Whereas, I guess we usually assume that these horror movies end with the very bad thing. But in this case, we know it's a very, very bad thing, and multiple people that we've never met are going to die.
Yeah. I do have to say, it's early in the movie, so I don't think this is a spoil. There's one point where a clown's head turns, and it is one of the scariest parts of the movie.
It does a good job not depending on leaning too hard into jump scares. It's not just loud noises. It's stuff like someone will be wandering and props will have moved.
Yeah.
Which isn't necessarily scary in itself, but what it does such a good job of is a lot of the times the character doesn't notice it. you as the audience notice something has changed, or there'll be a darkness and you as the audience will notice that there's sort of a face in the darkness that is there and then disappears.
Yeah.
It's more subliminal than something falls over and scares somebody.
It doesn't have like a musical stinger.
No, there's there's music in the movie, but it's almost no music in the footage.
Yeah.
Which is always this weird suspension of disbelief with me. I'm usually very good about suspension of disbelief, but often scary music in found footage movies pulls me out.
I can see that.
I can convince myself that these people don't want to stop filming for no real reason, but I can't.
But that somebody scored it.
Yeah, that somebody put a score to their snuff video or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm always like, really? Honestly, even surround sound sort of pulls me out. Like, I don't think that most camcorders can do better than a stereo effect. I don't know.
I'll give that to you. Part of the reason I think though that the clown works so well is they show it to the rest of the crew later, and their reaction to the film is amazing. Like, you see the people in the movie see that footage and what that means to them,
right?
And how everybody rationalizes that is the point, I think, when I first saw the movie, that I went from, oh, this is a terrible found footage movie, to, oh, no, they have something here.
Right.
I'm actually excited about seeing how this ends. Like, that was, I think, the point for me where I stopped doing 3 things at once and just cut it down to 2.
Yeah, and as things start happening, the characters start acting a little smarter, and a couple of them come out as better people, I think, that you kind of want to help, want to get out of it. They try, another thing that's really hard for these movies, haunted house movies in general, is why didn't you just leave? They sort of like gloss over that by saying, well, that's why we can't leave. And they go, oh yeah, I guess we can't leave. And don't really explain. Like, it's
they
like,
do worse than that. This is actually a part that annoys me about the movie. They specifically have like one of those dumb, the spirits erase the tape moment. Where they cut away. They're like, I need to tell you about something. And then the tape goes fuzzy. And then it's a different scene of like the main girl dancing in a field at a lovey moment. And then they come back and the 2 guys are sitting there. And the other guy's like, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. And they're like, I guess we can't leave. And then they just sort of leave it at that, and we're supposed to... And it could be anything. Like, it's probably money. Yeah. Like, it's probably that, like, everybody's entire life savings is sunk into this. But that they do it that way... It feels like also, they forgot to make a reason. Well, there's also some implication that the girl is like possessed by the house. Probably. But exactly why and how is unclear. And like that could be there too. When I rewatched it this time for the podcast, I was like, oh yeah, this part I hate. I hate this part. I understand why they put it in, but I hate this part. Yeah. Because this is the part where I'm like... Ugh. And when you're watching it the first time like I was, I kept on expecting them to explain that, and then they never did. So that was kind of a bummer. I don't know, there's 2 sequels. Are the sequels actually... Do you know if the sequels are actually follow-ups? I was surprised they had 2 sequels when I saw this. I have no idea. No, they're Shudder exclusives, so I don't know if... they explain any of that in the sequels. My guess is going to be the sequels are mostly unrelated, though. Probably. Which would be for the better, honestly. I mean, probably one of them's a prequel. I have no idea. Like, I'm vaguely curious, but I don't have Shudder. So I made a note here, too, that I should say that I don't think the coda works. I think the climax works, and... the reveal works, but I think that the movie goes on for another 5 minutes that it just doesn't need to go on for. Yes.
It's like
I do agree
it's
with
like
you
its
on
own
there.
sequel in 5 minutes, basically.
Yeah, it ends again. It has two endings,
Yeah.
basically, and the second ending is dumb.
And then it ends with the Law and Order font for the credits for some reason. And I was like, did they know they picked the Law and Order font? That's weird. I just noticed that and thought it was very strange. I just remember fonts too well. I don't know.
But I do think it's a very good example of the found footage genre. I think it does a very good job. It inserts some very good things. It's a strong contender. It was this or Evidence, I think, were my two.
Yeah, so I think I'll have to try to find Evidence. Do you know if it was streaming?
It was streaming when I saw it. It was on Netflix, but it's been a while.
I'll try to make time for that one. Yeah, I was going to say, are there any things you can think of that we didn't talk about that are like must-sees?
I mean, The Bay. I know you talked about that on the best of, but The Bay is really up there as like one of the best found footage.
The Bay is just what I want out of found footage.
Yeah.
Like, I love the idea of multiple, and we're not just dealing this from one camera crew's point of view, but from multiple people's point of view. And they've like put it together after the fact. I really like that sort of ABC special news report version of a found footage movie. And I think the taking of Deborah Logan doesn't quite pull it off, but it's an interesting idea that someone with Alzheimer's or dementia can be that can be a version of haunting.
Yes, I agree. It is good. Devil's Pass, very good.
Okay, I've not seen that one.
Devil's Pass goes around the famous incident in the mountains around, I think, Russia, where there was a camp and a bunch of people took off all their clothes and were found with radiation poisoning.
Right. Okay.
It is found footage. It is sci-fi found footage, which is
less
a bit wild.
common, but
yes, As Above, So Below.
Yeah, I was just going to say, As Above, So Below. It's one that I'm surprised people don't like more. I think that was really
it's very good. I remember you liked this one a lot, and I don't have patience for Jonestown, The Sacrament.
Oh, so Sacrament, a lot of that was just that I have not liked any of Ty West's other movies, so I think the fact that I finally saw one. I'm also, of all the morbid curiosities I outgrew, I think that Jonestown is definitely one that I didn't outgrow. I've watched multiple documentaries on the subject, and I think the problem with The Sacrament is that it's just the Jonestown massacre. It
is no different. Like,
it doesn't change enough.
About Jonestown, it is just that.
Yeah, it doesn't really change enough to really totally work. But it's got its it doesn't overstay its welcome, which is the big problem with a lot of these movies.
Yes. I also have to give a shout out to Grave Encounters and Grave Encounters 2. I find both of them to be delightful in different ways. They are both slightly different found footage horror movies.
Well, one thing we didn't really talk about because it came up so much on the Best of the 2010s podcasts is movies like the desktop found footage horror. Like,
yes.
I thought that that both Unfriendeds are pretty good. In fact, I think I liked the second one more. And I thought that Host, which just came out as a Shudder exclusive, so I guess you haven't seen it, was made during quarantine. And it's like a quarantine. It's not. You can tell that they had to make it kind of quickly, and that they didn't quite pull together a story, but they did a very good job using Zoom as a device in the to the point where the movie ends because they didn't pay for Zoom. So an hour is all that you're going to get because Zoom turns off after an hour if you haven't paid for it.
Yeah.
And they use some of the filters and stuff.
Nice.
It's really cute. And I think that you could, I would be totally fine with the people who made it sort of remaking it in a couple years, like just with a little bit more money and take a little bit more time onto it because it was very cool. I think that's also just a cool idea just because I imagine myself as a teenager watching that shit on my laptop at a sleepover with other teenagers on their laptops. I think that would be really cool.
It'd be pretty cool. And I think the last one that I want to like just give a general like shout to is The Houses at Octoberville.
I have not seen that one either.
That one is actually more of a send up to Cannibal Holocaust.
Okay.
Or actually not Cannibal Holocaust. The first one you mentioned that is half actual documentary.
Legend of Boggy Creek.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was an actual documentary about haunted houses and half, not recreation, but half horror movie about people who are trying to find the scariest haunted house.
Mm-hmm.
And basically these people who are stalking the documentary makers into making the scariest haunted house experience. It is...
So it's a little bit like the haunted house version of Behind the Mask. Being
Yes.
like about slashers. Behind the Mask is like following around a slasher killer in the universe where slasher killers exist.
Yes. But
Yeah, that's
it's
cool.
kind of like that crossed with The Strangers.
Okay, yeah.
In that the people who are making the movie don't realize they're in a horror movie.
Okay, yeah, that's another cool kind of twist on things. Yeah,
Yeah.
I should say, when I was looking up, when we were talking about Lake Mungo, I was thinking of it as a faux docudrama, and there was this whole Wikipedia tunnel I fell down, the difference between docufiction and docudrama, and I didn't know there was a difference, and from what I gathered, docufiction is a cinema verite or neo-realist that it introduces unreal aspects into a faux documentary, and a docudrama traditionally refers to telefilms.
Huh.
But I think that we use those interchangeably these days. It just seems like something I should mention, that there is according to Wikipedia articles, the people who edit Wikipedia articles, there's a difference in that they want to make sure we describe things the right way. I don't know.
Well, the other thing people don't necessarily realize is documentaries don't have to be telling the truth.
No.
So
I think that that's something that's actually, when I'm bored and flipping through YouTube, I don't know if I'm being targeted with these because of what else I do other places, but I've been noticing a lot of short form video essays on the way that movies like Tiger King, or not movies, but series like Tiger King lie and or there was The Jinx was the HBO one where they fabricated the entire period of time and they moved something to the end that had happened earlier just to make the guy seem even more guilty.
yeah.
And so that's an interesting aspect of sort of found footage, is the way that we can dissect what we consider documentaries. I think that doesn't even necessarily make it a bad documentary. That just makes it something to think about. It almost makes them more interesting in a lot of cases. The way that the information they don't tell us, the information they change. A lot of it's the information they don't tell us, because otherwise every documentary would be 20 hours long and boring.
But like even the very literal, they do not have to tell you the truth.
No. Or what's it? The Lemmings. For years, we've all thought lemmings jumped off cliffs
They just pushed them.
Yeah, the Disney nature crew just chased them off a cliff and then made up those facts, and they just sort of became canon facts.
Yeah, it's wild. But yeah, I think if somebody is looking to like go for the cream of the crop of what's out there for good found footage horror, you can start there and get like what is a good, like the cream on there.
Mm-hmm.
And if you like that, you can kind of go through and watch some bad stuff that comes up on your recommendations from there.
Every once in a while, you stumble on a good one that looks bad.
There will be plenty that look bad. There are a lot that are bad. I mean, I've watched a lot of haunted asylum movies.
Uh-huh.
I've watched a lot of haunted hospital movies. I've watched a lot of people lost in the wood movies, whether they are found footage, mockumentary, or just straight horror movies, because it's a genre that interests me. But
yeah, I suppose that I just spit right into my mic. I suppose that that's one of the things about if we would have just said mockumentary or found footage, I had to divide that into horror. But the point you're making, whether you mean to or not, is that there's at least 40 subgenres. We could just have found footage horror in the forest.
Yeah.
Found footage horror in an asylum, abandoned asylum. Found footage haunted house.
I definitely, when we first talked about this, I was like, well, do you mean this kind of found footage? Do you mean this kind of found footage? We could go down that. But, like, there's one that I have not dug up yet, even though it is probably the most most well anticipated, or not anticipated, the best found footage
best received.
Yeah, but I have not chased it down because I just don't watch as many movies in the last couple of years.
Yeah.
Which is Ganjiam, Haunted Asylum, which is a South Korean found footage movie. I have not checked it out because I am tired.
I don't know if it was streaming anywhere. I remember when it came out and people were talking about it, and I just sort of lost the energy to continue looking for it.
Yeah, that's kind of it. And I might also, I was just looking at what has come out recently to see if I have.
Yeah, that's the thing is I usually will make a letterbox list to go along with these podcasts, and it just isn't possible this time.
And that's
found
fair.
footage
There's
horror
just
is
so much.
It would be several pages. It's hundreds of movies. So just whatever you think found footage horror is, it's probably found footage horror. We'll count it in this regard. If it has any sort of mockumentary aspects and is somewhat disturbing or scary, I think we'll count it.
There's also the last one I kind of have meant to brought up, but it keeps slipping out of my head. Is there's that one British television show from the 80s, I want to say?
The one where they force people into live like old-timey? Or the one where the one that was like the original Real World?
No.
No? Oh, okay. That's something that they haven't really... There's so many options I've thought of things we're used to. Like, I think you could make, again, free idea, anybody who wants to write this, I think you could do an amazing found footage horror movie based on Antiques Roadshow, having a haunted thing. And the haunted thing messing up Antiques Roadshow, and all the cameras are capturing the haunted thing messing up Antiques Roadshow in some way.
Okay, it was 92. It was called Ghost Watch.
Okay.
It was a reality horror pseudo-documentary television film, first broadcast on BBC One. It's never been repeated on the UK television. It was on Shudder.
It was on Shudder.
The retrospective documentary Ghost Watch Behind the Curtains was released on DVD in 2013. The narrative presented it as live TV, and people thought it was haunted.
Oh, this sounds familiar now. Yeah, the live TV. Yeah, that sounds familiar now.
The ghost was nicknamed Pipes. That's where I was getting the P. Basically, there was this poltergeist activity that was happening. It's based on a poltergeist, and they had a person who was playing the ghost, and they sold it as live TV, and it terrified a bunch of people, and they've never replayed it on television.
They never showed it again.
It aired under the Screen One drama banner. Like, it's one of those that the BBC was besieged with 30,000 phone calls from irate and frightened viewers.
Yeah, I think that's something we don't understand is we have all this private corporate media in the U.S., and we always have. The BBC, the taxpayers technically pay for the BBC, so they really get shit when they do something that makes people mad.
Yeah.
My tax dollars went to this.
Like, part of it is like a final scene where Sarah Green is locked in an understairs cupboard with the howling ghost, and there's a possession scene.
Mm-hmm.
And like, Sarah Green had a Saturday morning children's cartoon, like a children's show. So like, people were traumatized. But like somebody, an 18-year-old with mental disabilities, committed suicide and mentioned the show in his suicide note. I'm not saying that actually is a firm causal link.
No.
But it is a thing that happened, and people blamed the show.
Oh,
sorry. He didn't mention the show. He just mentioned ghosts. And so they blamed the show.
And then they blamed the show. That sounds even more right.
Again, mockumentary, but it's not really found footage. Because they did it as live. But now it would totally be a found footage thing.
Well, and that brings me to another question I had for you, which was, can you think of any franchises or reboots or like adaptations that could really benefit from found footage? Because I remember there was a lot of talk of a Friday the 13th reboot that would be found footage, and
that would be terrible.
Well, I actually think it's a really good idea because people film themselves on camping trips now, and you could have all their phone footage like stitched together. They would probably just do it with one person having a camera, but you could do a really interesting thing with a backwoods killer murdering people, and like your other movie Evidence, the police sort of lining up all their phone footage.
That could be interesting. Well, I was thinking when you were talking about Cloverfield, I was thinking about how you could do that through like TikToks.
Like someone's doing their funny dance and the Cloverfield's like leg flies through the window at them or something.
Or like Snapchats or whatever. Yeah. But those are deleted. They're never saved on a server.
No.
Stuff like that. But what good...
Well, the two that I had in mind, one was watching Lake Mungo again. I realized that's how they should have done with the Poltergeist remake. It was released right at the height of everybody wanting to do found footage, and it just would have worked very well to have this family haunted by poltergeists and the people who come into... you wouldn't even have to really change the script from the original movie very much, because the people come in to observe it and try to quantify it scientifically. They're just recording everything. It just makes total sense.
I mean, I'd give like a portion of an organ to see a Fatal Frame movie.
Yeah.
Fatal Frame is a Japanese series of video games where you hunt down ghosts with the camera obscura, which is a super old school camera. The camera obscura in actual real life is not this at all, but in the game is a camera that has a crystal inside it that can do damage to ghosts. But I think in modern like adaptation, a Fatal Frame game of like being able to catch ghosts by catching them in, say, like short pieces of video and having to stitch them together to figure out where they went would be amazing. Where somebody's trying to figure out where the ghost is by like combing through social media would be cool.
Yeah, I think we actually talked a little about just very briefly about Fatal Frame in the last podcast, video game movies. There is a Fatal Frame movie from Japan that I couldn't get my hands on that we were thinking about covering, but I don't think it. I think it's just a pretty standard issue.
Oh, probably
Japanese horror movie. It's from 2014 and it got good reviews, but I don't really know. I don't think it follows what you're saying at all.
Oh, but no, this is why this would be an adaptation.
Yeah,
because like the Fatal Frame movie. The Fatal Frame thing is you're in a totally haunted old house and they're trying to close a hellmouth by sacrificing a traumatized person, and the only way you can fight back against these ghosts is taking a picture, and that's a really bog standard horror concept. But if you're going to adapt it for a modern day, like you have to figure out where this is by all of the terrible things that are happening in like these found footage.
And the social media, I mean, again, we just talked about the unfriended movies, but there's so much you can do with social media. The other one I think the book Carrie, Stephen King's Carrie, is actually written that way. It's written as a sort of found document. And to tell Carrie from the point of view of high school social media, I think would be really interesting. It might not be super scary, but I think it could be really interesting.
Scary.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, for me, is Carrie is not a scary story. It's a sad story. And so it's not traditionally scary, but I just really like it as a story. And I like the Brian De Palma movie. And I think that the two remakes that they did, the TV one and the more recent one, just sort of missed the boat by basically remaking
it's a
the Brian
tragedy.
De Palma movie. Yeah.
It's a tragedy that ends in a horrific murder.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to lean into the horrific to get to horror.
Yeah. And yeah, I think that would have worked beautifully. But yeah, since I don't remember what year, it was less than 10 years ago, and it did not make any money, the latest remake of it. So I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon.
Also, there was another video game that I was just thinking about that might be interesting. Oh, not interesting actually at all, but another video game that had a movie recently that I desperately want to try to find is the video game Siren, which is another Japanese horror movie.
Okay.
No one should play it.
Okay.
I mean, you can play it. It's frighteningly difficult. It's a survival horror game where you sight jack people. So you look through their eyes to see if they can see you. And the first level starts out, and if you move forward too fast, a sniper hits you. You have to look through his eyes to see when he's looking away from you. Anyway, a lot of people don't make it through the first level because if you walk 5 steps forward too quickly, you get sniped. I mean, I played it in high school with my high school friends, and so it was 4 of us girls, and we beat it. We beat it hard, but man, it is not a game that you take on lightly. We had the focus of teenagers. Let's put it that way.
You were full of Mountain Dew and sugar.
Oh, yeah, sugar. And spite. But they made a movie of that, apparently. And I desperately want to see it. But I'd have to find it, and I'm just not up to that.
Just not happening.
It's called Forbidden Siren.
Forbidden Siren.
See it anywhere. But yeah, no, Fatal Frame I think would be fun. If nothing else, like being able to figure out where the ritual would have to be, like going through social media posts from that town, that would be interesting.
See, and we're getting really close.
I'm not sure you can make a movie out of that. But
well, I'm saying we're getting really close to a choose your own adventure type situation.
I think I'm just remaking a different game.
Yeah, found footage video game. A social media video game.
They have those.
Yeah, they do.
Like Simulacrum?
Yeah.
They're like found phone, I think they call them. Which is also interesting, but I don't like them as much because they feel really snoopy.
Well, and then there's also augmented reality games, which have an aspect of found footage to them.
Yeah. I mean, got to get those Pokemon.
There's interesting things you can do with it, and I think the lesson is that too many people are resting on their laurels and just making boom scary, mostly boring movies with the format.
I mean, at least not everybody is just making snuff films with them anymore, because we had a big run of like Fear.com, which
there was something I didn't talk about that was a really disturbing series of movies, kind of in that period between Blair Witch and Paranormal Activity. There was the August Underground was one of the groups, and they would just make fake snuff films. They were basically special effects guys. There was one called Scrapbook that was sort of the cinema verite slaughter movie. Yeah, there was some stuff that was just gross. That is your other extreme. And I do think that like the first time someone does it, when you do a really gross, gory thing in a found footage format, it does impact harder. Like the first time you do it, like probably the first time someone made one of those movies, it was like, holy shit, this does feel like I'm watching a real thing. But after everybody else just keeps mimicking it, it really loses its cool.
And I think the difference between like the Fear.com and found footage movie is that live stream kind of thing of it. And Unfriended and the Zoom movies, I think, are straddling that line enough.
Yeah, there is actually a series of streaming. There's My Little Eye, and then there's Halloween Resurrection has a whole thing where Busta Rhymes has a live stream in a house, and it's actually a good idea. Somebody has a live stream in a house, which was a really big, cool new thing at the time. And Michael Myers shows up and starts fucking everybody up, and it wasn't supposed to be that way. That's a good idea. It's just really awful execution.
Yeah. I mean, it is where the genre gets muddled. Like, when is a live stream found footage? When are there found footage aspects in evidence, which hopefully at some point you'll see? You're looking at footage that has already been recorded. But say Fear.com, some of the footage has been pre-recorded, some of it's live, but you're not, as the audience, you're not watching the footage that is real to the audience.
Right.
The characters in the movie are watching the footage that is real to the characters.
Right. Which is sort of the Cannibal Holocaust thing. The second half of the movie is being watched by the characters and the audience. And
It's I think a lot of it goes on who the footage is real to.
God, now that we're talking about this, I'm really how many streaming horror movies there were in the late 90s, early 2000s. There was Dee Snider's Strangeland was also that. Streaming murders. I think one of the Hellraisers has streaming aspects to it.
I mean, closed caption video that streams to a place was a big technology boost, and people like to use it. I think we might have wrung this one dry, though.
We wrung it dry. So where can the people find you?
They can primarily find me at yourfavoritemonsters.com is where my podcast is. At Twitter is Avatar of Chaos. You can usually find me screaming about politics there.
That's pretty much what my private Twitter is for these days.
Yeah, I don't really have a public or private. And Tumblr, you can find me at Wandering Chaos. And I scream more about stuff there.
Yeah, Tumblr. I forget about Tumblr.
Everybody does.
Yeah.
It is a dying platform filled with death. And I kind of like it there.
No, that's cool. As usual, you can reach me on the Genre Grinder website at genregrinder@gmail.com, on the Genre Grinder Facebook page, at Genre Grinder, or at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers. All right, so goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.